O'Reilly. You need parts? O'Reilly Auto Parts has parts. Need them fast? We've got fast. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Product availability. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people. O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode number 29 of The Hunting Collective. I'm Ben O'Brien, and today I'm in Washington, D.C., on Capitol Hill, and I'm hanging out with Jeff Crane and Andy Treharne from the Congressional Sportsmen Foundation. Now, you might not know who Jeff and Andy are. You may never have heard of the Congressional Sportsmen Foundation, but hopefully this conversation will change that and let you know how important this group really is. Because CSF is the foundational arm or the go-between between the Sportsmen's Caucus and the hunting and fishing world. And the Sportsmen's Caucus is important is because it is a 300-member group in Congress that have dedicated themselves to the legislative policies of hunting and fishing and protecting our rights. And so CSF is the go-between. They're the middleman for that conversation. And it is an important conversation. And I think probably why this was important to me going in here was CSF is not a forward-facing group. They're not Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. They're not Ducks Unlimited. They're not Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. They don't do a whole lot of marketing. They don't have members. They don't really have on-the-ground presence, as we know conservation. But what they do is work for us every day to make sure there's a bipartisan voice for legislation. There's a bipartisan voice for doing the right thing for hunters and anglers. And that is, to me, it's a little bit in the weeds, but it's as important as anything. And what I came out from this conversation with is a gratitude for Jeff, Andy, CSF, and what they do. I want to shake their hand and say, I appreciate you standing up, doing all the hard work, digging down deep, and making sure our government works for us and for what we love. So hopefully this conversation will inspire you to learn a little bit more about CSF, understand what they do, understand the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus and why they're important, and be knowledgeable about those things. So, without further ado, episode number 29, straight from Capitol Hill. We're recording. Fellas, how's it going?
Great.
Good?
Yeah.
Introduce yourselves. We have Andy and Jeff. We're here. I'm here in the, I'll let you guys describe it. We're here in the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation office.
Correct.
In the heart of the district. Andy, kick it away. Introduce yourself.
Sure. Andy Treharne. I'm CSF's Federal Land Policy Director. And I live just north of Denver in a town called Louisville, Colorado.
Awesome. Jeff?
I'm Jeff Crane. I'm the president of the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. Home for me is Annapolis, Maryland, which is about 35 miles east of here. And as you said, Ben, we are 2 blocks from the United States Capitol, right on Capitol Hill.
That's right. I've spent a lot of time here, grew up in this area, spent a lot of time when I was a child as a tourist, but then worked for the NRA and spent a bunch of time down this way when I did that. But I always like to start these things because there's no video, nobody can see where we are. So Jeff, could you we're in your office, just to kind of describe the surroundings. Use your best prose. Andy, feel free to
I'll let the boss take that one, but I'll chime in as needed.
So my best prose on this is that we like to practice what we preach.
Sure.
And so being outside hunting and fishing is part of my life, and to have the opportunity to be able to marry that with my work has been just a dream come true. So my office has taxidermy in it.
That's right.
It's sitting with a window that looks right out onto the street there, and so here they are, and I suppose the interesting thing is my Grand Slam of wild turkeys is in here.
Ooh.
And that's mainly because my wife decided that she's allowing taxidermy at home, but she thinks turkeys are ugly, and I think turkeys are beautiful, so they're all here.
I'm a big time turkey hunter, and I have not yet achieved the Grand Slam, so we'll have to. That could be a whole other podcast.
There we go.
Just talking
Yep.
turkeys, but it's nice to feel kind of at home with taxidermy in DC.
Yep.
Probably not every office near the Capitol building has that.
No, I would say it's pretty unique. So
that's for sure.
There's a few of them, members up on the hill that they've got a few pieces in their offices.
Really?
Yeah. It's nice to walk in there occasionally and
is there any specifically you can think of?
Jeff spent some time in Congressman Don Young's office. And
yeah.
He's got some real good stuff from Alaska in there that he can probably describe in detail better than I can.
Yeah, you walk into the front of the congressman's office and there's a brown bear rug that's on the wall that he shot, and it's a massive bear. And then you go into his inner office and there's all kinds of cool stuff from Alaska and North America, and then he's got African stuff. So he's not afraid to wear who he is and his passions are on his sleeve. So
yeah, if you feel like 14 million hunters out there, if you just think about hunting, sportsmen not being just hunters, but if you just think about hunting, the percentage of the actual population that hunters are is very small. Would you compare that to the percentage of the hunters that hunters are congressmen or serving in Congress right now? Is it a very small percentage of folks that actually actively hunt?
Well, that maybe is the question: is the active hunters or fishermen, or those members of Congress that recognize that they have constituents that are actively involved in this? Because the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus has grown to be the largest, most active bipartisan caucus on Capitol Hill. There are nearly 300 members in the House and the Senate out of 535 total members of Congress. So that's a pretty good number, to say the least. How many of those guys actually hunt and fish? They'll tell you, oh, yeah, I don't know whether they do. They certainly don't have taxidermy in their office and stuff, but we get them out to Clay's shoots, and we fish with some of the guys, and I've definitely seen pictures. We do a slideshow with our big dinner every year and ask members to send in pictures, and it's great stuff, and them hunting, fishing with kids, grandkids, all that all the stuff that we hold near and dear. So,
well,
that's good.
Yeah. And one of our biggest jobs is just to work with them and show them the value in it for conservation, their constituents, and then it's a bonus for us if we're actually getting out into the field with them, and you get to see them in action. And some of them, they're the real deal.
Oh, yeah.
There's a few real deals. Senator Heinrich, I know, is the real
absolutely.
deal.
Hunter.
Yes.
Huge hunter. He's a DIY public land.
Yes, he is.
Real deal.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's necessary for those folks to actively go and pursue those things, but as a hunter, it'd be nice to know that they're there. Because it's as you well know, one thing to go hunting, another thing to support it. I think that's something we struggle with a lot of times. With our public image, is that to go do it and to be accepting of it and have not experiences, that's a pretty big gap.
There is,
So it's nice to know there's some of those guys running around.
I think some of them they don't like to talk about it for political reasons based on where they might be from, but I can think of a couple examples of folks that you don't hear them talk about it very much, but I know they go out of their way to do it when they're back home, and they still interact with their constituents that hunt and fish, and I get that too.
Yeah. And then, staff play a really important role in terms of advising members of Congress and on issues that maybe the member himself or herself doesn't know as well. If you've got somebody on that's a trusted member of your staff that does happen to enjoy the outdoors and hunting and fishing, and they can lean in, you're probably going to get a good reception out of that too. So we work the staff angle as well as the member angle to try to make sure we're getting folks out. And we do an August recess clay shoot every year, and that fills up in about less than a day. And we have a big component for first-time shooters with instructors, and if nothing else, somebody gets to pick up a shotgun and break a target and dispel some of the Hollywood myths about shotguns and what they are and what they do.
Some of them can be semi-auto. That's pretty scary.
Yeah, and we even let them shoot semi-auto. So
that's awesome. Well, that's a good segue into, it's pretty evident by the name. A lot of people will understand and know the name Congressional Sportsmen Foundation, but you guys would admit you're not as front-facing to the community as RMEF or Ducks Unlimited. There's no membership drives where you guys are giving away any products or anything like that. But your function is as important, if not more important, for the day-to-day life of hunters, legislation, policy, those types of things. So either one of you guys or both, just kind of give a quick rundown of CSF, what it is, how it runs, and you believe its impact. I know it's a long answer, but let's start to get into how you would explain that to someone who's never heard of CSF.
Great. So I'll start, and we can cut it up into sound bites so I don't get into a long monotone. But basically, it was founded in '89 to support the then fledgling Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus. Capitol Hill has caucuses, 400 or 500 different caucuses, some more known than others. And a caucus is nothing more than a bunch of elected officials that share some views on things and want to be educated on it. They were smart enough to realize, even with the staffs that they have in their member offices, that having an outside body that could kind of be that conduit, that link between the conservation world and the hunting and fishing world and these members of Congress was going to be important. And it was going to be important to have it be here in D.C., be in part staffed by people that understand the legislative policy, because at the end of the day, our function is to try to affect legislative and administrative policy, but it's a policy function. And so we're very different. We're not membership based. We're very different in that regard. And so that's how we started, and it's grown, and Andy can talk more about the expansion into the states, but almost every one of the national sportsmen's hunting conservation, fishing conservation groups are partners with us. So we play a very niche role in trying to help advance things that obviously we care about, and so do their members. So,
yeah, and about 15 years ago, after the Congressional Caucus had been up and running for a while, Jeff and some other folks that were here before my time realized that a lot of hunting and fishing policy is made at the state level with state game and fish agencies creating the regulations, state legislatures overseeing them. And at that time, there were a handful of states that also had sportsmen's caucuses in their legislatures, but they didn't really have a great way to communicate with one another and see what was working well in one state, not working well in others, weren't identifying threats to hunting and fishing collectively. And so CSF and Jeff in particular had the bright idea to create an umbrella organization for those state caucuses. And then we took that and ran with it. And since then, we've been trying to encourage other states to establish sportsmen's caucuses that are bipartisan, both chambers of a legislature. And then we've been real successful with that. We've got them in 48 states now.
Wow.
And we put on a conference every fall where we try to bring them all together and have policy presentations, give them an opportunity to talk about what's going on in their respective states, communicate with one another. And we've seen a lot of successful policy initiatives come out of that effort, where a legislator from one state will be talking to someone from another state and say, oh, that's a really good idea, and we don't have that in my state, so I'm going to bring it back and start talking to my folks and see if there's a way that we can make this work for my state. And
you guys work with the governors as well?
We do. We have a governor's Sportsmen's Caucus. Same thing, bipartisan deal. We've got 35 members all over the country, and we try to serve as a resource for them in the same way. They're a little harder to get in one place and at one time than state legislators, but we can play that role as well if we get a phone call from one of their staff members, and they'll call us with questions and say, hey, have any other states looked at this, and what was their experience, and have there been any lessons learned? Could they do it better? And we can either give them that information or help them track it down through our relationships.
Well, I imagine that to both you guys, the term bipartisan is important in this function. There is, we can go through this in some detail or bat this idea around, but I think that there's the traditional idea that the sportsman's community leans heavily Republican, and there's a bit of a movement in Andy's part of the world that some hunting and fishing organizations are starting to look a little bit more blue in the way that they act and function, in concern to public lands and things like that. Is there, Jeff, in your experience, has there been a change in those forces a little bit, right to left, how they view hunting, how they view the environment, how all that spins up into the actual legislation and policy?
Yeah, there absolutely has. And even going probably a little further back in history, but the Southern, then boll weevil Democrats, then the Blue Dogs and whatnot, they had a little bit more connection. I think it has to do really a lot with geographics. If you're from a district that's urban, suburban, your connection maybe is less to the outdoors and that sportsman's way of life, whereas you represent a more rural district, you might be more inclined. And so I think as you looked at the map, the Republicans tend to control more of those districts, and so that's why this perception that it leans further to the Republican side, and they have it. But we've got tremendous champions on both sides of the aisle here that really care about this. And when's the last time you went hunting and you got introduced to somebody and you asked them whether they were a Republican or a Democrat? I don't think that ever.
Pretty awkward.
It's real awkward. It just doesn't come up, and that's not the binding factor on this. It's the passion for the outdoors. It's the love of nature. It's this responsibility to be conservation minded, and that crosses party lines. It crosses gender, and so that's the beauty about working on this. But yeah, we could, more balance is always good in this town, because you get labeled as being partisan on one thing, then it makes it harder to convince the other side that your goals and objectives are altruistic and are about conservation and getting kids outside and all the stuff we know about. So
yeah, I would add to that. You referenced being in the West, and I think there is some change going on demographically in that part of the country as well that's driving some of that. And speaking in terms of my day-to-day job and talking with folks, it's really more about when you sit down with a policymaker and you try to talk to them, whether they're on the right or the left, and it's more about whether they'll have a real conversation with you and try to understand where you're coming from and the perspective, whether that's Republicans on public lands issues or Democrats on firearms issues or both. And as long as there are folks that are out there that are willing to have a conversation and work with you in a pragmatic way, I think that's what's most important, rather than some sort of label you put on folks.
Yeah, no, we always talk about on this podcast, pro nuance. Like there are, as you brought up some very, just in describing how to have a conversation, you brought up some pretty polarizing issues: guns, public lands, things that are immediately put up the walls of I'm this team, you're that team. I think that's especially in, we've found ourselves in a situation, Jeff, you surely know this, that a lot of our pursuits are complicated. They go across, age demographics. They go across different land uses. They go across a lot of different things. And for us to say, I'm pro this, I'm anti this, without, as a group, as sportsmen, understanding what that really means to be pro something and anti something else, I think that's important. Have you found, in your many years of doing this, and I know even prior to this, you were a PH in Africa, is that correct?
Right.
And there's a lot of other things that you did, coming up before you were in the chair you are now. I mean, how have you found that to be?
Yeah, I think being able to have the dialogue, first of all, convincing people it's okay to not have to be 100% in lockstep agreement with one another. We probably would find the three of us may not agree on every single thing out there, and just in our conservation world, just from a different perspective, and being able then to try to map that course through the political process is what, that's what we specialize in doing. And, sometimes that's successful. And in particular in federal politics, a lot of times it isn't. There's a lot of conflicting things that go on. There's a lot of pressures that go on. You can be dead right on the policy and still never get it done because it gets overtaken by either partisan politics or something else suddenly flares up, and we're not the number one thing if you look in polls as to what Americans by and large are concerned about: economy, jobs, threat on terror, is the stuff that's first and foremost for everybody's life. And so we're down the ladder to begin with. So that art of trying to find that deal and find their way through on the stuff is part of what makes this exciting, and some days pretty dang frustrating too. So.
And I think you mentioned there's 14 million or so hunters and anglers out there. And I think part of the reason that we have been in the long term pretty successful is that nuance and pragmatism, where when big stuff comes up, I think by nature we're a pretty pragmatic group, and we can come together and go have those nuanced conversations with folks, and most of the time it turns out okay for us in the big picture.
Yeah. Do either of you guys have a specific example that either recent or just something that was climactic for this organization that was pivotal to hunters and anglers, and it was a I would say just a turnkey moment for, hey, we're going to treat this issue this way, and here's who's on board, here's who isn't on board? Because I'm sure there's a lot, public lands is the current trendy thing to talk about, but that wasn't always top of mind for every hunter, every angler out there.
Yeah, I can think of a couple. This goes back a couple years now, but we hadn't had a duck stamp increase in a real long time, and that was something that was really important. But the political environment in Congress, not wholesale, but just because of a few louder voices that had some control over the process, made that probably difficult, more difficult than it needed to be. And it didn't go once, if I remember correctly, right. Once or twice, and potentially brought down some other policy goals with it. And
let me say, is that just a tax? Like, generally, we don't want to increase taxes. We don't give a shit what it is.
Yeah,
pretty much it. Even though we were trying to explain to them, we are the people that are going to pay it. You're going to. We want it. We are asking you to tax me more, and yet they would still say no.
I always use that as an example when I'm talking about. So maybe this doesn't help when I'm talking to a non-hunter about, I believe you guys coined the American System of Conservation Funding. Right. I'm talking to him about that. I'm talking to him about, there's this one tax, right? It's about ducks. And we go to, it's like the only, nobody's arguing. Give us the tax. Right. We came up with it. We want it. Let's keep raising as much as we need to raise it.
Right.
So I always use that specific example to say, you've got a willing constituency that's willing to pay, and it's almost ingrained in what we do to pay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's an example of partisan politics saying, like, well, we just can't. We promised we wouldn't raise them.
Right.
Yeah, and then they came back the next Congress and got it done. And there's examples at the state level too. Like where I live in Colorado, we hadn't had a hunting or fishing license fee increase since 2005 until this year. Wow. And that money is just not going as far as it once did. I mean, that's just math. And 2017 legislative session, we had bipartisan legislators that worked with the sportsmen's community bring a bill forward, and I still can't tell you why that didn't pass that year and pass this year. But it's one of those things where there's some pragmatism involved and a need to really go and educate people about who are paying these fees and why they don't mind paying more if they believe in what it's supporting.
Yeah, that's a good segue to that term, American System of Conservation Funding. So I was writing an article recently about Pittman Robertson. Your colleague Phil Hoon introduced me to this concept, and I was like, well, okay, we should, just like the North American Model of Wildlife Conservation, which wasn't something coined like a lot of people think at the turn of the century. It was coined in the 80s.
Right.
I think these are terms that can help us. Not only important terms because they can help us understand what's going on, but also it's inclusive of everything that's actually happening. So it's not just Pittman Robertson, it's not just license fees, it's inclusive of everything. So Jeff, can you talk about how much is that a part of your job now to fight so these things maintain and educate people on their legacy and explain that the ASCF and what that means for every hunter and angler?
Okay, that's a lot of
That's
questions.
a big one. I got it
all over the place.
Listen,
here,
what you'll understand is that I ask questions that are like 8 things long, and if we get to the first 2, that's fine. The other 6 we'll get to.
Let's go, because I think I'm hoping most of your listeners probably are familiar with Pittman Robertson and Dingle Johnson and those excise taxes on guns, ammo, fishing tackle, whatnot, as being dedicated funding. So then you add on top of that the license fees and permits and things like that, and it turns into the biggest funding source for most of the state fish and wildlife agencies around the country. And that is a very unique model to the United States of America, and a hugely successful model. And that's something that we as sportsmen and women need to be proud of. Not just because we're carrying the freight in terms of finances, but because of that just as further indicates our passion for wildlife. And it's game and non-game species, as we all know, that benefit from good habitat conservation, from clean water, from things like this. So this system is extremely important. And we do talk about it. I don't, and I know Andy and some of the other guys on our state-based efforts are constantly watching, because inevitably somebody comes up with the idea of diverting those funds away and at the state level to cover some other budget shortfall. And fortunately, the folks that drafted that legislation were smart enough to think and putting safeguards in there that if you do that, then you're going to sacrifice all that funding. But we have to check those states back on occasion, because somebody, like I say, somebody's figuring, there's a pool of money that we don't really care about turkeys. We care more about schools. Let's divert it over here. So we are watching it. From that side of things, we're working on other supplemental things to try to take some of the burden off. The state agencies have got a tremendous amount of responsibility, and that pool of money isn't going as far as it used to, and we got to be watching and we're working on some other things that we can get into to try to look at some of the other issues. And funding is always important. Unfortunately, it always comes down to dollars to support stuff.
Yeah.
Of course.
Well, it's a big part of our education mission too. I mean, a lot of these state legislators are coming from a background of being insurance agents or teachers, or they're busy, normal people, and if they have never hunted, or sometimes even if they have, they might not know where the money comes from, or that there are many state agencies out there that receive no general fund tax revenue, that don't know that there's a 10 or 11% tax on firearms or ammunition or fishing equipment that supports their state agency that issues their hunting license. And so we do a lot of educational programming on that front too. And it's everything from the basics to when they try to draft legislation to give away free licenses to some niche constituency, which, maybe they deserve. We don't know, but we want them to have the information that if they're not charging what it costs to issue that license, they're losing federal funding from the excise taxes.
Right.
Yeah, and I think isn't there a statute that says they don't spend that money on conservation in the first 2 years?
Right.
It's gone.
Right.
Take it, which
Right.
is a huge part of the Pittman Robertson Dingle Johnson funds.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there, because they're great and they're super friendly, and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
And so that's, you guys correctly.
And the states have to match.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
matching thing. A lot of times they use the license dollars, but nonetheless, it's it's a pretty incentive driven program when it really comes right down to.
Well, somebody a long time ago was very, Franklin D. Roosevelt and the folks back in the 30s when they had that conservation conference came up with these programs were pretty smart.
Really,
I mean, you
smart.
think for it to be 80 years plus for that single program. And he's talking about license fees and Pittman Robertson funds and Dingle Johnson funds. 60%, 70%. I'm not sure what the number is, but it's I've seen anywhere from 40 to 60% of state funding for conservation.
Yeah,
coming from, and wildlife management is coming from that system.
No, I think even more important is that that assent legislation that says the states can't divert the hunting and fishing license money that they collect themselves protects the federal money. So it all works together. And, so we've gone since the 1930s, essentially, without having any significant diversion of hunting license revenue away from conservation, which I can't think of another program like it. They may be out there, but it is pretty unique.
One of the frustrating things about that program is that I grew up in Western Maryland, and my dad hunted, and my whole family hunted. I'm sure you guys had some similar experiences. They didn't sit you down the first day you bought a license. Say, here, guess what? It's a beautiful thing. It's to be celebrated. It's part of our heritage. This is why you get to go hunting in the greater sense of the word. I mean, it's a long story, but the big part of it is user pays, public benefits. That's a huge part of it. And that's not a part of the storyline every young hunter gets to hear.
I hope they're changing that.
I hope so. Hopefully this conversation helps to change that. But I think when we talk about it in terms of Capitol Hill, it's such an impactful piece of legislation, and I'm sure, Jeff, you could speak to how much legislation comes and goes. And, the building blocks of our conservation movement are still here 80 years later.
Yep.
That's pretty unique.
Yep.
It's got to be.
Yeah. And there have been attempts to change it. In particular, there have been attempts to change Pittman-Robertson and redirect some of that funding towards things like victims of gun violence and things like that. And so, we've had that's been politically difficult to stand into that and say, no, this is not what this money is for, and we got to protect the integrity of this kind of stuff. And so, there's a constant need to be vigilant and keep an eye out, because people are trying to do things that don't necessarily fit in with what we think. So
I haven't heard a whole lot of solutions for how to replace that funding if it goes away when people come up with bad ideas either.
Yeah. Well, and then you talk about the number of hunters on the decline, and there is a need for at some level to have a solution.
Yeah, well, and I think there's a difference between replacing it and supplementing it.
Right.
And Jeff alluded to it a little bit earlier, and there are some things going on at both the state and federal level on that front. And I think the sportsman's community, generally speaking, is, I think even since I've been here for 7 or 8 years, there's been a change in philosophy and an openness to looking at some of those things and trying to identify some solutions, because that conservation ethic is still very strong and important to a lot of people.
Yeah. Do you guys have you done a lot to this point with the Land and Water Conservation Fund?
Oh, yeah. We've been involved in that for a long time. One of the things that program-wise is the Making Public Lands Public component of that, which was to direct a certain amount, 1.5% or $10 million, whichever is the greater, to go to these projects where there are literally landlocked pieces of access points to federal public lands.
Sure.
Willing seller, willing participant that'll put a right-of-way easement, and those don't typically score in the scheme of things when they're measuring projects under LWCF. So we worked with the coalition, with the environmental community to talk about, incorporating this idea. For us, it's really access for hunting and fishing, but recreational access. We're all concerned about kids not getting outside. And one of the issues becomes, if you've got federal public lands that you can't get to, that's a problem. So we're trying to address that. That is in the current authorization language. Actually, the Resources Committee, when they passed the bill last week, increased it to 3% and $20 million. So that was a win right there in terms of, that ability, because there's a lot of acreage, especially in the West, that is inaccessible, and we need. Well, all of us know that more access is going to be better for getting people out there.
Can you give me just a quick, I think people that we were talking about earlier, as these things become trendy, I think there's a lot of people in the hunting industry that know now what the Land and Water Conservation Fund is, that maybe years past would have laughed off the need to even know what it was, which is a great thing. But can you give everybody that doesn't know just a really quick rundown of that program?
All right, I'll start, and then Andy can correct me when I get.
We've
off
talked
base.
about it on this podcast.
Yeah, no,
a lot,
I know. Yeah, so it started in the 60s, and so it's been around for a long time. And again, the idea was, well, there were in particular there were offshore oil and gas royalties on federal waters, and the idea was to be able to redirect some of those royalties back to conservation through what they created as the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And so the program has been around again for a long time, 50 plus years. And I'm just delighted that there are some folks that are willing to listen to the idea that, it's not sacrilege to look at a 60 or 50-year-old program and say, is there ways to tweak this to make it, more applicable for the 21st century than the middle of the 20th century? And so we're supportive of the concept, the program. We just appreciate the fact that we were able to work with partners to include some access specific language in there. And Andy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I think that was a good summary. One of the challenges with that program as a whole that has been around since the mid 60s, and it was coming out of the Eisenhower years. They created a blue ribbon task force to look at outdoor recreation in America. It was post World War II. The interstate highway system was new, and they realized that there was going to be a growing demand for recreation. And so those folks had a lot of forethought, and that was a very good thing. But I think one thing that gets lost in a lot of the publicity and the advocacy around LWCF is that it's really only been fully funded one time in its history.
Yes.
And going back to that pragmatic viewpoint of trying to get positive things done for the sportsman's community constituency, I look at that and say, are there opportunities to do this in a different way that is either more attractive to appropriators or can get us over the finish line to full and permanent funding so that it doesn't have to go through the appropriations process every single year?
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, because it has become somewhat politicized in some ways, I think it can make it more difficult to have those conversations because people become more rigid, and people in the advocacy community become more rigid, and then by extension, members of Congress become more rigid in terms of their flexibility to look at things in a pragmatic way and see, hey, how are there some changes that we could make that maybe we up this from 900 million to 1.5 in exchange for making some modifications or allowing some other folks to have a vested stake in this. And that's a difficult message to deliver up there because everybody retreats to their corners and says either this is great or this is not great.
I imagine that rigidity comes from the fact that there's oil and gas involved, and
I think that's
environmental issues involved. Those kind of things are coming together with this program.
There is, and you look at, back to your point about Pittman Robertson and promoting that and educating people about it. I often wonder if we put as much money into promoting Pittman Robertson as certain interests put into promoting LWCF, would it become more of the sacred cow that LWCF has become? And I think LWCF has done things that benefited me personally.
Sure.
Absolutely. Some of that access I use all the time.
I could think of 2 or 3 places.
Yeah.
And I could think of a playground in Bozeman, Montana, where my kid was playing.
There you go.
That I looked at the sign and it said, "Thanks to the Land and Water Conservation Fund."
Absolutely.
I thought, seriously?
Yeah.
Like, there's just, it's such an entangled thing to understand.
Yeah, and it's back to the nuance. It's also difficult even when the money's there and it's been appropriated, getting to the agencies and talking with them on how they spend it. And our part of our job is to make sure that they're spending at least a good chunk of it in ways that benefit hunters and anglers. Yeah. And that is a very, very complicated question. And there are landowners involved and willing real estate transactions and all these different layers to it that make it a very important but also very challenging issue to deal with on a year-to-year basis.
Yeah, that's the good point you make. Back to the point about Pittman Robertson and that system of funding not getting shined up and put out there to the public as much. And it feels, we had a public lands roundtable on the podcast not long ago, and I was very much saying, like, it's easy to follow the trend, right? It's easy to hashtag something or say you're all about something without really understanding what's going on. I think there's huge parts of that mirror in politics. Something becomes trendy, something becomes the thing to do at that moment, something that becomes things that makes you popular inside the halls of Congress and outside. You go do it without really understanding, while leaving behind or running right over top of a very important system. In this case, Pittman Robertson. It's crazy.
Well, politics is a popularity contest.
Right.
So.
That it is. That it is. It's good. I mean, I know
it's looking good that the LWCF may get funded in perpetuity. I think that would.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's a lot going on that front with the deadline coming up at the end of the month, and
I'm personally not worried about. I mean, I suppose I shouldn't say I'm not worried about it, but they're gonna pass some short term continuing resolution to keep the government floating along until after the elections. The big deadline is to get this thing passed into law before the end of this Congress adjourns in December, because if you don't, you got to start all over again with a new Congress. Nobody knows what that new Congress is going to look like, but
Sure.
There's a lot of work that's been done to get this year after year back up to this point, and we got a few years of authorization for it the last time, and now it's time to see if you can't drive it home, and as Andy said, see if we can get this done. And the brass ring is to get it done with mandatory permanently authorized funding, and I still think it's a win if you get it permanently authorized, even if we have to go back to the appropriators, because you can come fix that later, to go to zero and let the perfect be the perfect, be the enemy of the good. Again, I'm out on the limb where guys are going to be throwing rocks at me, for saying these things, but you have to be pragmatic in this job up here, and there are times when it's not popular to say, we got to cut and run with this. We did that with gray wolves in Wyoming and Montana. The deal just wasn't there to do, in Montana and Idaho, the deal wasn't there at the time for Wyoming, let alone the Great Lakes. And, it was not popular to say we're going to encourage cutting the deal and taking the win for Montana and Idaho just to break the logjam and demonstrate we have the backbone to say, enough is enough.
Yeah.
These things need to be managed by professional wildlife managers, not by the media and the hype in Congress. And so those are sometimes the issues that we have to pick a side, and it's not always easy.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot, but there's a few I can think of. I'm sure you guys could talk circles around me on a lot of these issues, but things pop up, right? New Jersey black bears, most recent thing,
right?
These things just pop up, not out of nowhere. The New Jersey black bear thing has been circling around. So give me a quick. I think that's just a good example of these kind of issues that you're talking about that pop up, and this one's been swirling for a while, but
there's that one. And there's good stuff too. I mean, when FLTFA came up earlier this year, when they passed the omnibus spending package, I didn't anticipate that we were going to have the opportunity to do something that good as part of it. And some of our friends in the land trust community came to us and said, Chairman Bishop is thinking about marking up a Federal Land Transaction Facilitation Act bill that had been expired since 2011, and the acronym is FLTFA, and it sounds kind of scary because it says Federal Land Transaction.
Yeah, I was like, what?
Yeah,
tell me
more.
more.
So it does sound kind of scary, but it's actually a pretty solid program where BLM can go out and identify part of their regular planning process these isolated parcels or unusable parcels without a lot of value to the public, and they can sell them. And rather than that money just going into the Treasury, it goes into something called the Federal Land Disposal Account, which they can pool money and use it to buy better lands, or landlocked parcels, or consolidate checkerboard, things like that. And we said, we'd be happy to help you with getting this program reauthorized.
Yeah.
But, we have some language we'd like you to consider. And it was specifically to be able to spend a portion of that money on landlocked parcels that have hunting and fishing access. And they said, okay, because I assumed because they thought it would be helpful in getting it over the finish line. But, that was one of those things that we've been working on it for a while, but just this small window of opportunity, something came up. We were ready. We could get it in there, and that flew through. I mean, that was a 3-week process of getting some more money for landlocked parcels in perpetuity, and that's a permanent authorization. So.
Yeah, I think I can think of as many wins as there are, trouble spots. this point. I can think of the fire borrowing that was in that
Yeah.
same omnibus package.
Yeah, it was
as
in
one-
there too.
as another part of like, whoa, cool.
Yeah.
Solve that problem.
Yeah, no, it
Um,
comes together when they have to fund the entire federal government. There's sometimes some opportunities that aren't always there.
Yeah, so there's good and bad. I've tried to talk about that fire borrowing as just a good example of something you'll never hear about.
Right.
You'll
Yeah.
never hear about. But that's something that, when you talk about, is there enough money to manage these federal lands? Well, if you're stealing it for putting out fires,
fire suppression. Yeah.
fire suppression, there's not as much.
Right.
You can't just go ask for more.
Right.
I guess
Right.
sportsmen you could, but they're not going to.
Absolutely.
So those are small wins that can be celebrated as much as the fights. I think in our politics and our being advocates, we just want to focus on the fight. Like, we got to fight that. We got to whack that mold down. We got to whack that mold down. Whack that one down. But sometimes, the omnibus bill passes, and we've got a couple of wins to talk about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no doubt.
And
Some of that gets a little policy wonkish, and
Mhm.
that's part of the challenge. Is why is that important? Why is fire borrowing important? Well, as you said, if you're having to take money from inside the Forest Service and reprogram it for fire suppression because the West is burning up, well, you're not being able to do the proactive things for trails and access points, for parking areas, for management of streams and other habitat and things that becomes back to the dollars and cents. It becomes, where do I put my money? And you can't just let it burn, because
Yeah.
people see that, and
That hits the news.
yeah.
Quick.
So,
it's-
that becomes those little wins sometimes are a lot bigger than just a little win,
Yeah.
I can think of one, and this is now going back a long time ago in 2005 when the highway bill was being reauthorized. And part of the highway bill is excise tax on motorboat and small engine fuel that goes into the Dingle Johnson account in terms of for bumping up that amount. And we were only getting 14.9%, we as the sportsman's community, out of the 18.3 cents. So there was about a nickel in there that wasn't coming back into, was just going into the highway fund. And we successfully argued and got that money to come in there. And since that time, it's over $1 billion of additional funding for fisheries conservation and habitat, for boat ramps, for boat safety. That's real money looking at a little nickel and saying we're missing that and getting our fair share of this thing. And that was not what it was intended. And we were able to get that back. That was a very boring little fight over a nickel. And yet at the same time, the net impact of that thing has been dramatic.
When you put it in those terms, I think people are probably happy to have you guys around.
Yeah.
Right?
Hope so.
I am. And I think that it's those things, right? Being able to, it's erroneous at some level to expect every sportsman to understand all this stuff. You just don't have the time of the day.
No, they'd rather be sitting in a duck blind.
Of course.
Sure.
And so I think, as part of this conversation is understanding that there's guys out there like yourselves that are handling it, taking care of it, working on their behalf. I think that's important. As much as anything with this policy stuff, really, it bubbles up all the time, and it bubbles up to a point where they hear about it, like the black bears. You don't hear about it until it's a full-on fist fight.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it'd be nice to cut that off before it's people with signs,
Would be.
protesting the black bear hunt.
Yeah. No.
And we do some of that stuff, and we do successfully cut it off before it gets there. Unfortunately, the ones that do show up, like the black bear hunt, they make instant national media stuff because people have a wrong perception about what a bear is, and then it just inflames it, and by then the game
Gone.
gets pretty dang hard for us at that point without a change in the administration up there.
Well, yeah, and so let's hit that real quick, because I'm just assuming everyone knows. Can you give me a quick rundown of the most recent legislation passed in New Jersey, or the most recent ban, air quotes?
Right. So it wasn't, and again, I'll let Andy, if I go off, I don't think it was legislation. I think it was a decision made by the now governor and his department up there to say that they were going to suspend the bear hunt indefinitely. And basically stop it. And
Yeah.
that's what's happened. And, all of us know that management is done really well when it's regulated, and hunting plays a critical role in that component of this thing. And the bear hunt has been very successful in New Jersey, and because New Jersey has a lot of black bears. And so it's been a good tool. It's been working well. The antis obviously got into somebody's ear or his ear and whispered enough and got enough traction on this thing that they decided, against the direction of their Fish and Game agencies, or DNR, or whatever it's called in New Jersey, to go ahead and implement this ban. And, that's where politics can come in a bad way, And so, unfortunately, as I said, and maybe, hopefully it isn't going to mean something bad happens to somebody up there that's going to trigger something. But it's going to take something, beyond rational common sense, I think, to try to put this back on track. And I think, I'm afraid it's gone for this fall hunting season.
Yeah, sounds like it is. You feel like that's a slippery slope there? I mean, I'm always wary of the slippery slope argument. Like, don't make any changes or it's all going to go. Do you feel like the bear hunting specifically, we've seen it in British Columbia, and now you see it in New Jersey, where people, for whatever reason, bears are a tipping point for where hunting lives and doesn't live, and what's appropriate and what's not? Do you feel like this recent set of bear-related bans, hunting bans, are a slippery slope, or if we allow it to continue, or if it does continue outside of our control, next thing we know, they're banning deer hunts, and they're banning coyote hunts, and they're banning all things like that?
Well, I would say, make no mistake that the same people who want to ban the bear hunt want to ban deer hunts too.
For sure.
And,
yeah.
Whether it's a slippery slope, I don't know. I mean, we've had this stuff going on. We lost spring bear hunting in Colorado in 1992, and
we opened black bear hunting in the state of Maryland in 8 or 9 or 10 years ago, something like that.
And applying for those tags for like 6 years. Jeff, open it up.
And it's increasing in the number of bears that they're taking. So there are some wins that go along with the losses. And,
absolutely. And there's the really screwed up thing about the New Jersey situation is that I believe that executive order that the governor signed directed his state agency director to ban bear hunting on the state game lands. And the ironic thing about that is all of those properties were acquired by the state of New Jersey using
Federal
Pittman-Robertson money that was produced by hunters and shooters.
Yeah.
And so, I think there's a philosophical and a practical problem there. But, there's so many problems with the concept. I mean, since we lost the bear hunt in '92 in Colorado, we've got way more bears, and a lot of those bears are dying anyway from vehicle collisions or because they're getting into somebody's trash in Steamboat or Aspen or Durango, and we've got overtaxed state Fish and Wildlife Agency employees. We had one summer where they were spending, I think the statistic was just in one area between Glenwood Springs and Aspen, where a lot of those bear problems exist, 40,000 man hours just responding to problem bears. And, I don't think there's anyone that is reasonable that thinks that our state Fish and Wildlife Agency employees' time is best spent responding to an old lady that says she's got a bear opening her trash can in her backyard.
I mean, go to California mountain lions.
There you go.
Yeah,
same idea.
Yeah,
or any other thing.
65% of those cats have household pets in their stomach when they necropsy them after the state has to go in and kill them because they've got into trouble.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there because they're great and they're super friendly and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/meateater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/meateater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you were to stack up, I'm always at the point like hunters aren't always right. Like we're not always educated enough. It's just the regular person.
I don't know about you, man. But
Andy's always right. That's why we've added him to the podcast, because Jeff and I, we don't know.
No.
Andy,
no,
I'll tell you what.
I'm not
Colorado
always
versus Maryland guys.
Yeah, that's right. Maryland guys,
Yeah,
pragmatic.
pragmatic.
Know-it-alls out west.
That's why you're moving to Montana.
That's right. I'm getting to know more and more just as I think about that. But I think, if you were to stack up the hypocrisies in the animal rights community, that wouldn't take long. It'd be a pretty high stack. I think there, like you said, there's just so rooted in success what's happened in the hunting space and fishing space too. These conservation successes, you could stack them up as high as the hypocrisies on the animal rights side, and say, look, if you're an animal, you're listed on the Endangered Species Act on the ESA, that it should be a victory to get delisted and hunted again. If you were to look at the whole of the species, if you look at this, in the case of Wyoming's grizzly bear hunt, if you were to look at just those 22 grizzlies that are going to get killed, okay, yeah. But if you look at the whole of the population, it's a win. It's a victory to
absolutely
opened up, delisted, and hunted again. And that's every species out there that is a huntable game species. Most of them were saved and brought to bear by these policies.
Yeah, most of them never ended up on the endangered species list.
That's right.
Right.
You look at that list, you don't see a lot of game species on there, and I think there's something to be learned there.
Yeah.
I wish more people would pay attention to that part of it. But I think part of the sage grouse stuff is because there are people that are committed to that because they enjoyed hunting them.
Yeah. What are we can get real deep down this rabbit hole, but I'd love to just go over in some detail here in the last part of the podcast, what you guys are working on right now, that maybe is getting publicity, maybe it's not. Something that you guys feel is very important to the caucus and to the foundation and to what you're working on. I would imagine that like the main tenets that most hunters hear about are like Farm Bill, anything public lands related seems to be in their ear, and anything firearms related seems to be in their ear. But I'm sure there's many, many, many other things that even Farm Bill seems to be something that used to be on the tip of every hunter's tongue, but not so much anymore. So is there anything, I know it's a broad again question, but anything on there that you guys are pounding on really hard that folks need to know about?
Yeah, we've got a couple things moving in the last week or two. One is a bill called the Modernizing Pittman-Robertson for Tomorrow's Needs Act. And
I like how you guys with the act names are always it's
that's
impossible
nice.
to remember.
That's also by design. We make it so complicated that nobody can, and the acronyms are so bad.
Yeah,
acronyms are horrible.
You can't ever keep up with them.
But that one would provide the states a little more flexibility on how they use their Pittman-Robertson allocations so that they can support some recruitment, retention, and reactivation. R3. There's another one. Yeah, there's another one for you.
Alliteration. I always like that. Works.
But they're somewhat restricted on how they can use that money, as they should be. But I think there's a growing recognition that some of the declines in hunting numbers are a threat to the funding model. We've already talked about earlier today. And there are some states that want to have some additional flexibility to use that money to recruit, retain, and reactivate new hunters. And so that's getting some traction. There's another bill that's up. Is it tomorrow or Wednesday? That is called the Target Practice and Marksmanship Training Support Act, and that one also allows the states a little more flexibility with how they can use their shooting range grant programs that are funded by Pittman-Robertson. And part of the issue now is they have to come up with a 25% state or local match to build a range. And this bill would lower the local or state match requirement to 10%. And rather than that 2-year window to obligate the money that exists now, they would extend it out to 5. So the states and the locals have to come up with a little bit less and have longer to do it. And part of the motivation behind that is just with urbanization and sprawl, there's fewer places for people to shoot. There are more public land shooting conflicts out there. And there's a threat of lost access if you like to shoot on public lands and you live anywhere near a metropolitan area of any size. And so the hope is that if this passes, it'll be a little easier to get some ranges on the ground and build some of that stuff up, give people places to go, hopefully take care of some of those conflicts with other recreational users and adjacent landowners, things like that.
That's good. So those are good things, and things that, a lot of people don't know. Most hunter safety courses are all state hunter safety initiatives paid for by Pittman-Robertson. Is that how it works?
Yeah, at least partially.
Partially at some level.
Yeah.
Folks just don't know that. I didn't know it till recently.
Yeah.
Right.
And so there's just little parts of that I've written about and talked about, but having you guys on to be able to articulate how it gets from an idea or a good idea, and sometimes it's like a back end good idea, like, oh, we could do this in addition to all the other things we're doing on this bill or this package of legislation. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, and I think some of the administrative stuff has been really solid too, with the expansion of hunting in the National Wildlife Refuge system.
Mm-hmm.
We've got hundreds of thousands of acres, more places to go hunt now, since they've been trying to marry those refuge regulations up with the state management objectives and state regulations. It sounds like we're going to be able to carry bows across national parks real soon.
Yep.
I'm pretty excited about that. That one was just a ridiculous oversight by somebody 7 or 8 years ago when they passed that bill that allowed you to carry a firearm across a national park.
It's just not a bow.
But
not a bow or
you couldn't carry a bow.
Yeah.
So, if you're wanting to go access BLM or Forest Service or even private land, but you got to cross a national park to get there, you could carry a loaded firearm if you're a gun hunter, but
not
if
your
you're an
bow.
archery
Hey, listen,
hunter.
Andy, bows are dangerous. You can't be carrying bows around. Somebody can get cut. Cut an artery.
No.
Somebody had to sit there and ride those guys and ride those guys and ride those guys and say, this is important enough that they're going to actually issue, and whatever director's order or whatever it's going to take.
It took a regulatory change.
Yeah, announce a regulatory change to move that needle and just take care of something that was an oversight was pretty simple on things. So,
I think that's important too. I mean, I think everyone in our society, but hunters too, there's these ideas that these large, pieces of legislation or even things that are legacy legislations that have been going on, like Pittman-Robertson forever, they just come and go and they do their thing and nobody really has to work at it. But if you follow the money from, when the manufacturer pays their excise tax to when it goes, in a lot of cases to the IRS and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and then it goes to the states, and the states have to do this. And if you follow that money, you just kind of get tired.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's
Man,
exhausting.
it's hard to even read
Right.
that stuff. So, folks just understand how complicated, how good of a system it is. It's still complicated.
Right.
It still takes so much to get that money in the right place, and when it's there, to get it used in the right way.
Yeah,
That's right.
Think about all those guys sitting in a room in the 1930s coming up with that.
yeah.
Bastards.
Yeah. Smart, but
N-
smart.
Without internet.
Yeah, smart.
Yeah.
Yeah, not even
Had
Google.
had some vision. So I mean, that's I think our challenges are to look at those big opportunities for the 21st century, and the little stuff is super important, and we're always going to be diligent at going after that. But some of these big things, another one we haven't talked about is the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, which is an effort to try to get out in front of primarily the species of greatest concerns, because again, the states just don't have the money anymore to go after all the things that the wildlife agencies have to do now. And there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 11 or 12,000 potential candidate plant and animal species that could end up on the threatened or endangered species. And I would argue nobody wants to see that happen. And
No.
if we can do proactive management and get out in front of this thing, it'll not only be good for conservation, it'll be smart for America in terms of dollars and cents. And so we've generated quite a bit of interest in this legislation in the House and the Senate. We were candidly a bit disappointed that we couldn't figure out a way to weave it into the House Resources Committee markup last week, where they did the land and water conservation funding. They did maintenance backlogs and park service and whatnot. There was a lot of money that was coming out, and we're all supportive of that. This would have rounded, in our mind, this would have really rounded that package up to get to this level too. It just didn't make it yet. We're still not giving up. We've still got, some other thoughts and things in mind to try to make it happen. But, that would have been a shot in the arm to have that put into that mix. And, those are the bits of disappointments. And when you're talking to the chairman and he's like, no, it's not going to make it. And you're just, it's frustrating, but we're still going to be there. 94 House co-sponsors on the bill right now, and bipartisan leadership on it in the Senate. And it's just too important in terms of a big long-term conservation fix for us to not be driving this thing as well. So,
No, and I think, how would you describe, when I hear you talk about that, it in my own mind, having some experience with the Sportsmen's Caucus, codifies kind of how important that caucus really is because of what it does. But how would you just describe, we told people in the beginning what it is, but how would you describe its importance and kind of its impact on the caucus itself on legislation like that?
If you look at a lot of the legislation that's out there that we've discussed during this podcast and that you discuss on other podcasts, I would almost guarantee you that every one of those bills is introduced and largely supported by members of the Sportsmen's Caucus. Not true on everything, but there's an awful lot of support from that. It gives us the opportunity to be able to reach those guys in a very credible fashion. We've been around in this town for nearly 30 years. The ethos that we have here is do not ever get caught up playing partisan politics, and do not ever get caught up giving somebody partial information or, God forbid, the wrong information. You have to be, CSF has to be the credible source that they can rely on, that we're going to give them the whole picture, tell them this is what's going on, this is where it is. And I think that we've earned that reputation because we're here. We see these guys, we see the staff members here. And so I think it's a critically important function to have that group of people, if nothing else, that they trust us to get good information to them.
Yeah.
In a timely fashion, because we can do it quickly here, whether it's a electronic push of a button to get something up, which you could do from anywhere. But more importantly, if you have to hustle 2 blocks up the street for a meeting with somebody that gets called at 5:00 at night when they're saying, now, what exactly do you want us to slide in here? And you have to be there to explain that, you know?
The bipartisan thing strikes me as something that everybody can take to heart, like that you guys are focusing on making sure what you're doing is best for wildlife conservation, hunters, anglers, before it's, hey, we really believe that, we're pro-extraction, anti-extraction. Don't start there. You start with
Right.
The core of what we do, who we are, the stuff hanging in your office tells a lot about those things too. And I think that's important. But have you seen, Jeff, because you've been around many decades, have you seen more challenges in recent administrations, the Trump administration, the Obama administration? Have you seen more wild swings in partisan politics? Like, I can think of the Bears Ears National Monument as like the political football that they're just throwing back and forth. And I know from talking to some folks on the ground there that just makes it harder to manage that piece of land effectively if it keeps getting its designation changed because it's a political win or a political loss or whatever. Have you seen that heightened in recent administrations, or it has always been the challenge?
No, I would say, and not just administrations, the Congress too. Unfortunately, I think it's been heightened, and I think part of it is just the electronic age, and all of a sudden, you're constantly being able to just bombard your position, polarize. People want to weigh in on stuff that they used to have to write a letter to your member of Congress and things like that. Now you can just punch something into your keyboard. And unfortunately, it has created that image of polarizing, and our stuff gets caught in it. Sometimes, a Bears Ears or something like that, maybe it is in there anyway, but sometimes we just get caught. I mean, we've come so close to getting a Sportsman's package done, over the years, and then found out at the very end it's caught up in just purely partisan politics. They didn't want Obama to get a win, and 2 years ago on his way out the door to sign a pro-sportsman's bill, and that's what basically happened to it. And that's the kind of stuff that is frustrating. And yeah, it's gotten worse, and it's both sides. There's plenty of blame to go across both sides of the political aisle, and the stakes are high, the money's high for these kinds of things. And as I say, I attribute part of it just to the electronic new age making it that much more polarizing.
Yeah. I would imagine that in the grand scheme of like human communication, we're toddlers when it comes to using digital communication. We don't know how to do it.
Right.
We don't know how to do it effectively.
No.
Mostly it's just garbage.
Yeah.
But, it's good to know that there's a lot of wins happening in this building. There's a lot of wins happening on Capitol Hill here for Sportsmen. I mean, that's a huge thing, I think, for people to understand. It's not, if you get wrapped in a community of people, or you're wrapped in an organization that wants to make it seem like the sky is falling, it's falling in parts, but it's not all falling.
No, it's never as good as you think it's going to be, and it's probably never as bad as you think it's going to be.
Yeah, I think that goes back to that slippery slope argument. There's some organizations around on both sides of the ticket here that would say the sky is falling gets members. The sky is falling gets people to act, and that scares me sometimes to the point where I've seen it. Like I said, I've seen it on one side and I've seen it on the other. I've seen one side that says I hate that organization. I'm like, well, you're doing the same thing they are, just for a different cause.
Right.
So that's pretty scary to me. I mean, you feel like that's pretty damning sometimes on the sportsman's community. It's just, you want to feel like you motivate people to act, and your motivations can then become a little bit muddy.
Doesn't help.
Yeah,
yeah, for sure. So it never helps, and that's just not our MO here. That's just not our style here. And do we get frustrated when things come off the rails? Yeah, you bet. There's a lot of effort and time and energy and anticipation, and when it doesn't go right, it can be pretty maddening. But the wins are equally as rewarding, and if we can get those 100 numbers to turn the corner and start coming back up, and we can keep making sure that we got clean water and good landscapes and good habitat management, and get people outside, I think that's I know personally that's what I get motivated by, is to make sure that we can hand this off, and I can feel like I've done my part to pass it on.
Yeah.
So
that's a huge part. Thank you for that.
You bet.
For sure. I think before we end the podcast, we should talk about hunting.
That sounds good.
You want to do? Let's lay off the policy for a minute.
We're in.
Jeff, you were telling me about your Colorado adventures. So what are you most excited about the fall? You're going to go hunt elk in Colorado?
Yeah.
Second rifle?
In second rifle in southwestern Colorado, and have been doing it for a number of years now with a small group of buddies. And, it's a high mountain camp. It's awesome. And just for a guy that spends most of his time hunting in the east, just to be out in those mountains and the vistas and, hear the elk, and they're just magnificent. The views are magnificent, and the buddies that I'm with, it's a special time, and we all look forward to it. And it's a little dry out there, so I'm fingers crossed that maybe some moisture will generate itself.
And he'll take care of that for you.
Yeah, there we go. We redirect some of this hurricane water.
We'll take it.
Yeah. Andy, what do you got on the docket?
I've got a third season elk hunt in western Colorado and Grand Mesa lined up. Going with some buddies from high school that I haven't hunted in a while with, and got some old men going with us, so should be some good stories.
Easy now there, buddy.
Even older than you.
Okay.
Whoa.
Yeah. So hopefully they don't shoot anything, because I'm sure I'll have to carry it out if they do.
That's what I was going to say.
But that's probably why I'm invited. So
that's half the fun anymore.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. I'm just
hauling off the mountain.
Yeah. I've got 2 little kids at home, so any time I can sneak out is a good time.
Yeah. I know that feeling. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you sitting down. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for fighting for Sportsmen and making sure we have a voice. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
All right,
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
That's it. That's all. Episode number 29 in the books. I really appreciate Jeff Crane and Andy Treharne hanging out, what they had to say, how they describe what they do for a living. And really, most of all to me, bottom line on this thing is how many times they brought up bipartisanship. How many times they brought up having to deal with partisan politics and having to work around them. And bravo to these guys for being the voices for bipartisanship, for working hard on what I would consider some of these are the little things, the little details that will allow us to continue doing what we do outside. And so don't forget about Andy and Jeff and CSF and what they do as you go and hunt, and you go and fish, and your monies are funneled back into conservation because they are important. And so let's not forget them as we go out this fall and go hunting. Next time on the show, we're going to catch up with Charles the Rabbit Man Rodney, another resident of the DC area, somebody I've hunted with in the past. He is an amazing character, and his nickname is the Rabbit Man. So come on back for that next week. Till then, huntingcollective.com for articles, for video, for all the other stuff with this podcast. I want you to continue to go there and hang out. And soon enough, you'll find that there's going to be a new home for the Hunting Collective. We'll talk about that in the week to come, very, very soon. And hopefully you'll be excited, as I am. So we will see you for episode 30 next Tuesday morning. Bye.
You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins. Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.